The wind cut through the empty streets like a knife, carrying icy flakes that stung the skin. The small human colony lay silent under a heavy blanket of snow, lights from the windows casting a faint glow on the white ground in the distance. Footsteps crunched slowly, unevenly, like someone was dragging themselves forward with the last of their strength. She was small, thin, and wrapped in a torn cloak that barely covered her shoulders. Under the hood, her face was pale and her lips trembled, her breath coming in small clouds. Her boots were worn out. The soles cracked so badly that snow had melted inside them, soaking her feet until they felt like blocks of ice. She had knocked on 7 doors already. At the first, a human woman opened the door, took one look at her alien eyes, and slammed it shut. At the second, a man had shouted through the wood that no filthy alien would sleep under his roof. The rest didn't even answer, though she could hear voices and laughter inside. Each rejection felt heavier, colder, like the frost creeping into her bones. Her mind was spinning. She had come here thinking humans might be different. She had heard stories whispered in the darker corners of alien space, that sometimes humans helped strangers, even aliens. But maybe those were just stories to give fools like her false hope. The wind grew stronger, and she stumbled, knees hitting the frozen ground. Her hands burned from the cold when she pushed herself back up. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she might fall asleep right there, in the snow. But she forced herself to move, one slow step at a time, until she saw a small cabin at the far end of the road. Its window glowed with the dim orange light of a fire. She reached the door and hesitated. Her heart pounded, not just from the cold, but from fear that this last door would slam in. Her face too, if it did. She wasn't sure she would have the strength to keep going. Still, she raised her hand and knocked, the sound weak and dull against the thick wood. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then the sound of heavy boots on wooden floorboards came closer. The door creaked open, and she saw him, a tall human man holding a lantern, the firelight catching in his brown eyes. His hair was messy, his jaw unshaven, and he wore a thick coat patched in several places. He looked at her without speaking, his gaze steady, unreadable. She couldn't tell if he was deciding whether to throw her out or let her in. She swallowed hard and tried to speak. Her voice came out rough, almost breaking. I need somewhere. Just for the night, she whispered. The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept over her, her wet boots, her shaking hands, the thin cloak clinging to her frame. She expected the door to close. Instead, he stepped aside slowly. "Do you want to come in?" he asked, his voice low but clear. She froze, unsure if she had heard him right. Was this a trick? Why would a human she had never met invite her into his home? But the warmth spilling out from the door was too much to resist. She nodded slightly, stepping inside as he closed the door behind her. The heat from the fireplace hit her like a wave. She almost gasped, her fingers twitching as they began to thaw. The cabin was small, with a single bed against one wall, a wooden table, and shelves, stacked with tools and supplies. It smelled faintly of smoke and pine. The man set his lantern down and moved toward the fire, tossing another log onto the flames. He didn't ask her any more questions, just pointed toward the bed. "Sit," he said simply. She hesitated, glancing at the bed-clean blankets, soft-looking pillows. She hadn't slept in anything like that for years. Her bed for the past seasons had been a metal floor, a crate, or the frozen ground beneath the stars. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, still ready to jump up if he told her to leave. He walked over to a shelf and pulled out a folded blanket, handing it to her. She took it slowly, her hands brushing his for the briefest second. His skin was warm. "Thank you," she murmured, almost too quietly for him to hear. He gave a short nod. Turning back to the fire, minutes passed in silence. The only sounds were the crackle of burning wood and the faint whistling of the wind outside. She kept glancing at him, wondering why he hadn't started asking questions. Every other human she'd met had wanted to know who she was, what she was, and what she could give them in return. But he just sat by the fire, staring into the flames, as if he wasn't in a hurry to know anything at all. Her eyelids grew heavy, but she fought to keep them open. She didn't want to fall asleep in a stranger's home, especially not in the home of a human man. But the warmth, the softness of the blanket, and the steady sound of the fire worked against her. Just before she drifted off, she heard him speak, his voice quiet, almost as if he didn't want her to hear. "No one should freeze to death in my town," he said, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe she might live to see morning. When she opened her eyes, the world felt softer than it had in years. The glow of the fire still danced on the cabin walls, pinking them in shades of orange and gold. For a long moment, she didn't move, afraid that if she did, this fragile comfort would vanish. The bed beneath her was warm, the blanket heavy and smelling faintly of pine smoke. Her fingers curled into the fabric, as if holding on to something she could keep. For so many years, she had slept on metal floors that bit into her skin, on hard stone where her bones ached. This softness felt almost dangerous, as if her body might forget how to survive the cold. She turned her head slightly and saw the human. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his coat still on, a rifle resting across his lap. His eyes weren't closed, he was watching the outside darkness, his face calm but alert. The faintest sound of wind seeped through the wood, but in here it was silent. She pulled the blanket closer, her voice small. "Did you stay there all night?" she asked. He didn't look at her right away. "Someone had to keep watch," he replied simply. "Keep watch? For me?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Snow hides more than cold," he said. "There are people who'd follow footprints if they wanted you bad enough." Her chest tightened. No one had ever watched over her while she slept, not without wanting something in return. Her mind flicked back to nights in the alleys of alien cities, where she had to sleep with one eye open or risk never waking up. And here was a human, guarding her without even asking her name. She sat up slowly, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. He stood and moved toward the small table, placing a dented metal plate in front of her. It was simple food: bread, dried meat, and a steaming cup of something that smelled faintly sweet. "It's not much," he said, "but it's hot." She picked up the cup and held it between her hands, letting the heat seep into her fingers before daring a sip. The liquid slid down her throat, warm and thick, and she felt her stomach flutter in surprise. It had been so long since she had eaten without fear that someone would snatch it away. He sat across from her, leaning his elbows on the table. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone calm but direct. She hesitated, then said, "Lyra." He nodded once. "I'm Callan." The way he said it, without any threat, without the usual human edge, made her relax just a little. But then came the question she had been dreading. "Why were you out there alone?" Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. She could feel his eyes on her, waiting. She lowered her gaze. "It's not safe for me where I was," she said carefully. "Not safe?" He pressed. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Some people think I belong to them." She didn't explain more, but from the way his jaw tightened, she knew he understood more than she'd said. After breakfast, she moved to the corner of the cabin, still wrapped in the blanket. Callan began to work, chopping wood outside and checking supplies. Every so often, he would glance through the window, as if making sure she hadn't vanished. The thought made her uneasy. Was it caution or concern? By midday, the snow had stopped falling, but the sky stayed heavy and gray. Callan came in, stamping the snow from his boots. "You should rest," he said. "You're not leaving in weather like this." Her instinct was to argue, to keep moving before anyone could find her. But the warmth, the steady safety of the cabin, held her in place. For the first time in years, the thought of staying somewhere didn't feel like a trap. That night, she sat near the fire while Callan mended, a tear in his coat. The sound of the needle pulling through fabric was almost hypnotic. She found herself speaking without meaning to. "I've never had a warm bed before," she said quietly. Callan didn't look up, but his hands paused. That's not right. He said, everyone should have one. She smiled faintly. A small, fragile thing. In the past, words like that would have sounded fake. Like something said just to make her drop her guard. But here, with the fire crackling and the air thick with the scent of pine and smoke, it felt real. Later, as she lay in bed again, the blanket pulled up to her chin, she listened to the sounds of the cabin, the pop of the fire, the faint creak of the wooden walls, and the steady rhythm of Callan's footsteps as he checked the doors. Her body was warm, her heart still cautious. But something deep inside her dared to hope. She didn't know how long this would last. She didn't know if tomorrow would bring danger to his door because of her. But tonight, she wasn't freezing. She wasn't running, and she wasn't alone. And for Lyra, that was more precious than anything she had known in years. The night outside was black and heavy. Snow had stopped falling, but the air was still sharp, like it could cut through skin. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed low, casting soft shadows that swayed on the wooden walls. Lyra lay in the bed, her body wrapped in the thick blanket Callan had given her. Her eyes were half closed, but she was not asleep. She had learned long ago that real sleep could be dangerous. Dreaming too deeply could mean waking to chains or worse. So she kept her breathing slow, her ears open. She could hear him moving. Callan was by the window again, his rifle balanced across his knees. The dim light from the fire caught the edge of his face, showing a line of focus in his eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking out into the night, scanning the darkness like it might come alive. Her mind kept asking why. Why would a human she had just met stay awake to guard her? Why offer her warmth when he had no reason to trust her? The galaxy was not kind to those who helped strangers. In her experience, kindness always came with a price. She finally broke the silence. You've been watching that window for hours, she said quietly. Callan didn't turn. Not hours, he replied. Only as long as it takes to make sure trouble doesn't follow you here. Her heart skipped a beat. You think trouble will come? I think, he said, that someone out there lost something they think belongs to them. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She pulled the blanket tighter. And what if they find me? Then I'll deal with it, he said. Simply, his voice steady. It wasn't loud or proud, but the way he said it made her believe him more than she wanted to. In the quiet that followed, the fire popped softly. Lyra found herself studying him. He didn't wear the clean uniform she had seen on human soldiers. His coat was patched, his boots scuffed, but his movements were precise. She could tell this was not a man unused to danger. Her curiosity pressed forward. Why did you let me in? She asked. This time, he turned to look at her, his eyes catching the firelight. You were freezing, he said. That's reason enough, she frowned. No one else thought so. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Maybe no one else has been where I've been. There was something in his voice, something heavy with memory. She didn't ask, but she wanted to. Instead, she tried to offer her own answer. I've been running for a long time, she admitted. From what? He asked. Her throat tightened. From people who think they own me. He didn't push for more. He simply nodded once and turned back to the window. Somehow, that made her more uneasy than if he had demanded the whole story. It was as if he could already see the truth behind her words without hearing it. The hours stretched. At some point, Callan got up and walked to the table, pouring water into a cup and placing it beside her bed. You should drink, he said. Cold can dry you out faster than heat. She sat up and took the cup, the cool water refreshing her throat. You're different, she said, without thinking. Different? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Most people, she said, want something before they help, and you think I don't? She hesitated. Do you? He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. I just don't like seeing someone die when I can stop it. It was a simple answer, but in the galaxy she knew, simple answers often hid complicated truths later. When the fire had burned lower, Callan pulled a blanket from the shelf and laid it across the floor. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep here. You don't have to." She replied quickly, "I know," he said, "but you look like you need it more than I do." She lay back down, staring at the shadows above. The sound of him settling on the floor was strange, quiet, careful, like he didn't want her to feel guilty. It had been years since anyone had given her a choice. She closed her eyes, but her mind was still awake through the night. She heard him shift now and then, as if even in sleep he was listening, somewhere deep inside. A dangerous thought crept in, that maybe, just maybe, this human wasn't like the others, that maybe this cabin could be more than a hiding place. But she quickly pushed it away. Hope was heavy, and she couldn't afford to carry it yet. Asterisk, the snow had cleared by morning. Leaving the ground white and bright under the pale sun, Lyra sat near the fire, sipping from a cup Callan had given her, her blanket still wrapped tight. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the cold biting into her bones. Callan moved around the cabin, pulling on his coat and boots. "I need to go into town," he said. "We're low on a few things." She looked up, her voice uncertain. "Should I come with you?" He shook his head. "Not today." There was no anger in his tone, but there was a hint of caution. He knew the people in town, and he knew how they looked at outsiders, especially alien ones. When he returned later, his steps were slower, his shoulders heavier. He placed a sack of supplies on the table without saying much. "What happened?" she asked. "They know you're here," he replied, his voice low. Her stomach tightened. And they're not happy about it," he said, his eyes meeting hers. That afternoon, it started. A knock at the door, sharp, hard, and impatient. Callan opened it to find two men from the town standing there. One was tall with a narrow face and cold eyes, the other shorter but built like a wall. "You've got company," the tall one said. "The kind we don't want here." Callan's voice stayed calm. "She's no trouble," the shorter man snorted. "They're all trouble, sooner or later." "She's not staying long," Callan replied, though his tone didn't match his words. The tall man stepped forward. "We've heard about the bounty on her kind." Lyra froze where she sat, her fingers gripping the blanket tighter. It felt like every word from their mouths was stripping away the fragile safety she'd felt here. Callan's expression hardened. "I'm not interested in bounties," he said. "You can leave now." The taller man leaned in, his voice low, but filled with threat. "People talk, Callan. They'll remember whose side you were on." Without another word, the two turned and walked away, their boots crunching through the snow. When the door closed, silence filled the cabin. Lyra looked down at her hands. "You should have let me go," she said quietly. Callan shook his head. "Not happening. You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll hate you for this." "I don't care," he replied simply. The way he said it made her heart feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. That night, she lay in bed but didn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way the townspeople looked at her. It wasn't just distrust. It was the kind of hate that didn't need a reason. She knew too well what that could lead to. Her mind whispered that she should leave now, before things turned worse for Callan. When she finally got up, the floor creaked under her bare feet. She moved toward the door, still wrapped in the blanket. But before her fingers could touch the handle, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Going somewhere?" Callan asked. She turned, startled. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." He stepped into the firelight, his gaze steady. "If they hate you, let them." "I don't," he said. Her breath caught in her chest. No one had ever said words like that to her, not without asking for something in return. The next morning, whispers followed Callan in town. People glanced at him and then at each other. Some crossed the street rather than walk past him. A few muttered under their breath. It didn't seem to bother him. But to Lyra, every glance, every whisper, was a reminder of how dangerous it was for her to be here. Days passed like this, the tension building quietly. Then one evening, a stranger arrived in town. He wasn't from here, that much was clear. His coat was travel-worn, his boots heavy, and at his hip hung a weapon unlike any human-made one. He began asking questions, showing a small hologram to anyone who would look. Lyra's blood ran cold when she saw the projection through the cabin window. It was her face, thinner, dirtier, but unmistakable. Callan came inside with a grim look. "That's not a friendly visitor," he said. Her hand shook. "A hunter?" He nodded. "And he's looking for you." For the rest of the evening, Callan kept the lights low. He checked the rifle, moved quietly through the cabin, and never let his guard drop. Lyra sat by the fire, her mind racing. She had been found before, but this time was different. This time, someone might actually fight for her, but she didn't know if she could let him, because fighting for her meant risking everything he had. And in her experience, no one risked that much for someone like her. The next morning was colder than usual. Frost clung to the windows like thin white lace, and the fire in the cabin burned low. Callan moved quietly, loading his rifle while glancing toward the door every few seconds. Lyra sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Though she barely drank it, through the small window, she could see the stranger moving through town again. He spoke with the blacksmith, then the merchant, always showing that same small hologram. Her face flickered in the pale morning light. Every time the image appeared, her stomach tightened. Callan stepped to the window, his voice low. "He's persistent," he said. Her throat felt dry. "What will you do if he comes here?" Callan didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "If he comes here, he won't leave with you." The hours crawled by. Snow began to fall again, heavy and slow, muffling the sounds outside. But when the knock came, it was loud enough to shake the door. Callan motioned for her to stay back, then opened it slowly. The stranger stood there, tall and broad, his coat dusted with snow. His eyes were sharp, the kind that measured everything in a glance. "Evening," the man said, his voice smooth. "I'm looking for someone." Callan leaned against the frame, blocking the view inside. "Plenty of people pass through here," he replied. "Who exactly are you after?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. Pressing a button, Lyra's image appeared in blue light, spinning slowly. "This one," the stranger said. "Her name is Lyra. She's valuable." Callan's eyes didn't move to the image. "Doesn't look familiar," he said flatly. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I hear she's been seen in this part of the colony," he said. "Rumors," Callan replied. "This isn't a big place. If she were here, I'd know." A long silence stretched between them. The snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, settling on the man's coat. Finally, the stranger said, "If you do see her, it would be worth a lot to tell me." He turned as if to leave, but his eyes flicked past Callan, just for a moment, toward the shadow where Lyra stood hidden. Then he walked away, his boots crunching in the snow. Callan shut the door, his face unreadable. "You think he saw me?" Lyra whispered. "Doesn't matter," Callan said. "He'll come back either way." That night, the cabin felt smaller, the air heavier. Lyra paced near the fire while Callan sat at the table, checking his weapon again. She hated the idea of him being dragged into her mess. "You should give me up," she said suddenly. Callan's head snapped up. "Not happening. He could kill you," she argued. "And if I hand you over, what happens to you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. They both knew the answer was worse than death. Hours later, the sound of snow crunching outside broke the silence. Callan moved to the window, peering out. The stranger was back this time, moving directly toward the cabin. Without knocking, he pushed the door open, stepping inside with slow, deliberate confidence. "I don't like liars," the man said, his gaze sweeping the room. Callan stood between him and Lyra. "You're trespassing," Callan said calmly. The stranger smiled thinly. "And you're protecting stolen property." The air snapped tight. The man's hand twitched toward the weapon at his hip. But Callan moved first. The rifle came up, the sound of the safety click echoing in the cabin. "You've got two choices," Callan said, his voice cold. "Leave on your own, or I put you in the snow." The man's smile faded. "You won't always be here to protect her," he said, stepping back slowly. "Maybe not," Callan replied, "but tonight I am." When the door closed behind him, Lyra sank into the chair, her legs trembling. "You can't fight him forever," she said. Callan knelt in front of her, his eyes steady. "Then we make sure there's no need to fight him again," he said. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "it's time you told me the whole truth, so I know what we're up against." She stared at him for a long moment. Then with a slow breath, she began. "I was on a transport ship," she said quietly. "They were taking me to a place where people like me don't come back from." Callan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "My sister is still there," Lyra continued, her voice breaking. "I escaped, but she couldn't." When she stopped speaking, the silence was thick. Finally, Callan stood, his voice steady. "Then we're not done," he said. "We're going to get her." Lyra's eyes widened. No one had ever said that to her before, and for the first time, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. The fire burned low, sending faint waves of heat across the small cabin. Lyra sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Callan leaned against the wall, his arms folded, watching her with the kind of patience that made silence heavy. "You know almost nothing about me," she began softly. Callan didn't move. "Then tell me," he said. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to lift a weight she had carried too long. "I was born on a mining world," she said. "It was never home, just a place where the strong took whatever they wanted. My parents worked the tunnels, barely earning enough to eat. One day, a ship came, said they were offering work off-world." Her voice cracked slightly. "We thought it was a chance, but it was a trap. They took my parents away, and my sister and I were put in cages." Callan's expression darkened. "They sold us," Lyra continued. "First for labor, then for other things. I was 14 when they decided I would bring a higher price elsewhere. That's when the transport ship took us into deep space." She stopped, staring down at her hands. "That's where I escaped. There was a security breach, alarms, chaos, and I slipped away in the confusion. But my sister, she didn't make it out." Callan pushed off the wall, stepping closer. "She's still there?" he asked. Lyra nodded. "If she's alive, she's being kept in the trade hub on Crow Station. I've heard it's where they keep the valuable ones until buyers arrive." He rested his hands on the table, leaning toward her. "And the bounty hunter?" "He works for the ones who run that station," Lyra said. "They want me back because I escaped, and because I know too much about their operations." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, the only sound in the room. Finally, Callan said, "If we go after your sister, we'll have to deal with whoever's in charge of that station." Her eyes widened. "We? You'd come with me?" He nodded once. "I told you before, I'm not letting them take you, and I'm not letting them keep her either." Her breath caught in her chest. In her entire life, no one had offered to stand beside her without expecting payment. She almost didn't believe him, but his eyes were steady without hesitation. "How would we even get there?" she asked. "I have contacts," Callan replied. "Traders who owe me favors. We can get a ride close enough to slip in without drawing too much attention. And if we're caught, then we fight," he said simply. The plan was dangerous, maybe even impossible, but the way he said it made her believe there was a chance. She leaned back, feeling the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't feel like a hunted animal. She felt like someone with a choice. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Callan, why? You barely know me." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because I've been where you are, and because no one should be left behind if someone can help." The words sank deep. She wanted to ask what had happened to him, what ghosts he carried, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't ready to share. "Not yet," By the next morning, the air in the cabin felt charged. Callan gathered supplies, food, water, ammunition, packing them into a worn rucksack. Lyra helped where she could, though her hands still trembled at times. Every sound outside made her glance toward the window, expecting to see the bounty hunter return. Before they left, Callan placed a small blade in her hand. "Keep this on you at all times," he said, "and if someone tries to take you, don't hesitate." She stared at the weapon, the metal cold against her palm. She wasn't used to someone arming her. Most people had wanted her helpless. She gave a small nod. "I'll use it if I have to." That night, they sat by the fire one last time before leaving the safety of the cabin. The world outside was quiet, the snow reflecting the moonlight in a soft silver glow. Lyra found herself staring at the flames, thinking about her sister's face. The last time she had seen her, she had been crying but trying to smile. "I'm coming for you," Lyra whispered under her breath. Callan glanced over, hearing her even though she hadn't meant for him to. "Yes," he said, "we are." The sun rose slowly over the frozen hills, casting pale light across the cabin. It would be their last morning here for a long time, maybe forever. Callan moved with quiet purpose, checking his gear one final time. Lyra folded the blanket she had slept under, her hands lingering on the soft fabric. It was the first warm bed she had known in years, and leaving it felt like leaving a piece of herself behind outside. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the path leading out of town. The air was sharp, every breath turning to mist. Callan kept his rifle slung across his back, his eyes scanning the horizon. They didn't speak much. The weight of what they were about to do hung between them like a shadow. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Lyra stopped. She turned to look back at the small cabin. In the distance, smoke still curling from its chimney. That place. "It felt safe," she said softly. "It was," Callan replied. "And when we're done, you'll have a place like that again." They continued walking until they reached the frozen river where Callan's contact was supposed to meet them. A small transport skimmer waited near the bank, its engines humming faintly in the cold. The pilot, a wiry man with a sharp grin, nodded at Callan. "Didn't think you'd cash in that favor so soon," he said. "Couldn't wait," Callan replied, handing him a sealed pouch. The pilot's grin faded slightly when he saw Lyra, but he didn't ask questions. As they climbed aboard, Lyra felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The skimmer lifted, gliding silently over the ice. The cabin grew smaller and smaller until it was just a dot against the white. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the sudden ache of leaving behind the only place she had felt safe. They traveled for hours, the world passing in a blur of snow and rock. Callan sat beside her, his presence steady. At one point, she glanced at him and asked, "Do you think we can really do this?" He looked at her without hesitation. "Yes," he said, "because we have to." By nightfall, they reached an outpost at the edge of the human territories. It was a place of steel and rust, filled with the smell of fuel and the noise of engines. Merchants shouted over each other, trying to sell goods from across the galaxy. It was chaotic, but in the chaos, they could disappear. Callan found them a room above a noisy bar. The walls thin but the lock strong. Lyra sat on the bed, the springs creaking under her weight. She looked around the small room and said, "It's not like your cabin." "No," Callan admitted, "but it's just for now." That night, they talked about the plan. Crow Station was heavily guarded, its outer docks watched by mercenaries and automated guns. They would have to slip in using a cargo transport, hidden among crates. It was risky, but the only way to get close without raising alarms. As they spoke, Lyra found herself watching Callan's face. He was focused, calm, and utterly certain. It made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, like the ground beneath her feet was solid again. Before sleeping, Callan set his rifle against the wall and sat beside her. "You should know," he said quietly. "Once we get your sister, you're both welcome to stay with me wherever I end up." Her chest tightened. "Why would you offer that?" He shrugged slightly. Because no one should have to wonder where they'll sleep every night. She swallowed hard, emotions catching in her throat. Callan, if we survive this, I don't think I'll ever want to leave. Then don't, he said simply. The next morning, the noise of the outpost woke them early. They ate quickly, then made their way toward the docks where their transport waited. As they approached, Lyra looked up at the massive ship towering above them. It was nothing like the small comfort of the cabin, but it was a path toward something she had thought impossible. Before boarding, Callan paused and turned to her. You ready? She nodded. I'm ready, but in her heart, she knew what she really meant. She was ready to stop running. As the transport doors closed behind them, sealing them in with the hum of engines and the scent of metal and fuel, Lyra glanced at Callan one last time. For years, she had lived moment to moment, never daring to dream of more, but now with him beside her, she let herself believe in a future where she and her sister could sleep in warm beds again, a future where she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And as the ship lifted off, leaving the frozen world behind, she whispered the words she had once said in disbelief, but now meant with all her heart. I never had a warm bed, human. Until you invited me into yours.